Close your eyes and let your mind drift back through time. Past the roar of cannons, past the golden age of discovery, past the Renaissance, back into the misty shadows of the medieval world. Imagine a place of stone castles and quiet monasteries, of flickering candlelight and snow falling softly on village rooftops. Now picture a single year, forgotten by most, but powerful enough to shift the course of history. That year was 1258, not a date often remembered, not a date taught in schools, but perhaps one of the most important turning points in all of medieval history. The year 1258 wasn't marked by a grand conquest or a single legendary battle. Instead, it was a quiet storm. A convergence of events that changed kingdoms, altered belief systems, and reshaped how people viewed power, politics, and life itself. Across Europe and Asia, from the chilly stone halls of England to the burning sands of the Mongol Empire, something was shifting, slowly, quietly, irreversibly. In England, 1258 brought a document called the Provisions of Oxford. To a modern ear, it may sound unremarkable, but in truth, it was a groundbreaking moment in the development of democracy. The barons, noble lords who had long grumbled under royal rule, forced King Henry III to accept a council of 15 to guide the governance of the realm. For the first time, the king's absolute power was questioned. It was not rebellion for the sake of chaos. It was the early murmur of something new, accountability, representation, and the idea that power could be shared. These provisions would not last forever. They would be revoked, reissued, and debated. But the idea they planted, the seed of constitutional monarchy, would grow for centuries, and it began in 1258. Travel eastward, and the ground shakes with the thunder of hooves. The Mongol Empire, once unified under the fearsome Genghis Khan, had begun to splinter. In 1258, Manji Khan Jenghis's grandson and the reigning Great Khan died during a military campaign in China. His death sent tremors through the vast empire. There was no clear successor. Civil war broke out between his brothers, Kublai and Arik Beke. This internal conflict fractured what had been the largest contiguous land empire in history. By the end of that struggle, the Mongols would still hold power, but no longer as one. The unity that had once terrified Europe and crushed dynasties was unraveling. This shift had global consequences. The Mongols had acted as bridges between East and West. Their empire was like a vast superhighway connecting silk roads and cities, from China to Hungary. When internal conflict arose, those bridges weakened, trade slowed, cultures became isolated again, and the dream of a single interconnected world paused for a while. Meanwhile, in the heart of the Islamic world in Egypt, another tide was turning. The Mamluks, a military class of slave soldiers who had risen through ranks with unmatched skill and discipline, defeated the last wave of Mongol advance into the Middle East. In 1258, as the Mongols sacked Baghdad, destroying the House of Wisdom, and bringing a tragic end to the Islamic Golden Age, the Mamluks prepared for a confrontation that would stop the Mongol surge. Their victory would protect Cairo and the rest of Egypt from the fate that had befallen Baghdad. It was the year that marked the end of one civilization's peak and the rise of another. But not all stories in 1258 were about armies and empires. Some were told in parchment and ink. In universities, monasteries, and royal courts, thinkers began to challenge how knowledge was recorded and shared. Scholars in Paris and Oxford explored questions about nature, logic, and the divine. A man named Roger Bacon, often considered one of the first early scientists, was developing radical ideas about observation and experimentation. He believed that learning should come from evidence, not just from inherited tradition. It may sound ordinary now, but in a time when questioning too much could mean punishment or exile, his thinking was revolutionary. The beginning of modern science was still far away, but the direction had quietly shifted. Even the weather spoke differently in 1258. Across parts of northern Europe, a cold spell brought crop failures and hunger. The climate was changing, if only slightly. And though it would be decades before the true effects were understood, historians now see these early signs as the beginning of the transition toward what would later be known as the Little Ice Age. The change was slow, barely perceptible to the people living through it, but real. It altered harvests, sparked migrations, and affected the rhythms of life in the countryside. And as winter descended across the continent in the final months of that year, people gathered by firelight, unaware of the turning gears above their heads. Farmers whispered of failing fields. Priests recorded strange celestial events. Nobles wrote letters sealed with wax, discussing laws that would soon be broken. In quiet corners of the world, something was ending, and something was beginning. 1258 did not echo with trumpet calls or end with fireworks, but it was a hinge year, a silent pivot in the story of humanity. While kings made treaties and scholars opened books, the future was being rewritten. In its own way, this quiet medieval year was more important than many of the ones we celebrate. So as you rest tonight, let your mind linger in that hidden corner of time. A time not defined by one hero or one war, but by thousands of choices made in dimly lit rooms. A time when the world shifted, not in thunder, but in whispers. 1258, a year you may have never heard of, but one you'll now never forget. As we return to the quiet corridors of the year 1258, imagine again the flicker of candlelight across stone walls, the smell of damp earth in the air, and the soft murmurs of monks recording time with ink and patience. Though the year held no single battle that changed the map, it was filled with slow, deliberate change. Changes that would ripple across centuries, touching the lives of kings and commoners alike. In the stillness of this year, the seeds of modernity were being sown. In France, a quiet transformation of power was taking shape. King Louis IX, known today as Saint Louis, was not a man of conquests, but of reforms. He believed that justice should be fair and that even royalty should be held to higher moral standards. In 1258, he enacted administrative changes that helped centralize royal authority, laying the groundwork for a more unified France. He also promoted the use of written legal records, a step toward accountability in governance. For the first time, laws and decisions were beginning to leave behind the echo of verbal command and become permanent, recorded for future generations. In the shadows of cathedrals, artists and stonemasons were hard at work, not in war but in worship. 1258 marked a time when Gothic architecture flourished. Tall spires reached toward heaven. Stained glass windows filled with blues and reds told biblical stories to those who could not read. But beyond beauty, these buildings represented the ambition of a new kind of world, a world where art, faith, and community could rise together. Cathedrals were the skyscrapers of their time, visible from miles away, symbols of hope, power, and permanence in an uncertain age. Meanwhile, in Scandinavia, something remarkable happened. Norway and Scotland signed the Treaty of Perth, which formally resolved the long-standing conflict over the Hebrides Islands. While not widely celebrated today, this treaty showed that diplomacy, peaceful negotiation, was beginning to emerge as an alternative to endless warfare. It set a precedent for how neighboring powers could settle disputes with words instead of weapons. This wasn't just a political moment. It was a shift in mindset. And it happened in 1258. To the south, in the Iberian Peninsula, Christian kingdoms continued their gradual reconquest of territories held by Muslim rulers. Though major battles would take place in later years, 1258 was part of a slow campaign that spanned generations. Cities like Seville and Cordoba, once centers of Islamic science and culture, now existed. In the in-between, Christian rule was spreading, but so too was cultural blending. Languages, food, music, and architecture from both traditions mixed to create something new. A quiet fusion, born not just of war, but of coexistence. This, too, was part of 1258. And far from the noise of royal courts and noble disputes, in the rural countryside, ordinary people were living lives shaped by rhythms that had not changed for centuries. They rose with the sun, prayed with the bells, tilled their fields, and feared the harvest. But even in these villages, changes from 1258 would eventually reach them. The idea that kings could be challenged, that empires could fall, that knowledge should be observed and tested, not simply accepted. These ideas would slowly trickle down, not in the same year, perhaps not even the same generation, but they would come. Monasteries, the libraries of the medieval world, were humming with quiet work. In places like Monte Cassino and Clairvaux, monks continued copying ancient manuscripts. Many of these texts came from Greek and Arabic sources, preserved and translated by Islamic scholars and now re-entering Europe through Spain and Sicily. In 1258, this transmission of knowledge was at a peak. Texts on astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and mathematics found new audiences. Silent revolutions were taking place, not in city squares, but on parchment. And this growing curiosity, the hunger to know more, was beginning to challenge the intellectual boundaries of the time. Even the church itself felt the stirrings of change. While it remained the most powerful institution in medieval Europe, internal debates and subtle shifts in theology pointed toward a more questioning age. Debates about morality, sin, and salvation were becoming more nuanced. 1258 may not have birthed the Reformation, but it contributed to the soil from which that future revolution would grow. As the year drew to a close, snow may have dusted the rooftops of London and Paris. Fires burned low in the halls of castles. In the East, the Mongol Civil War quietly escalated. In the Islamic world, the trauma of Baghdad's destruction still echoed. And across Europe, a strange stillness hovered a breath between storms. No one living then could know what 1258 would mean in the centuries to come. To them, it was simply a year, a passing season, another set of cycles. But history is like that. It's not always loud. It doesn't always announce its importance with trumpets and banners. Sometimes the most important moments come quietly. They hide in treaties and royal reforms, in books copied by candlelight. They wait to be seen not by those living through them, but by those who look back with the clarity of distance. And so, 1258 stands not as a monument, but as a foundation. Not remembered for a single act, but for many small ones that rippled outward. It was a year when change happened not with explosions, but with whispers. And those whispers would shape kingdoms, empires, faith, science, and the very idea of what power meant. As you let your eyes close and your breath slow, remember this: sometimes the most extraordinary years are not the ones we shout about. They are the ones we almost forget, until we look closer, until we listen to the silence. 1258 was one such year. Sleep peacefully now, knowing that even the quietest moments in time can carry the weight of the world.